Ladies and gentlemen, India is growing at about 7.6% per annum. It's an oasis of growth in the midst of a very barren economic landscape across the world. The challenge for India is really to grow at much higher rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for a 3-decade period, to be able to lift a very young population above the poverty line. India is passing through a window of demographic transition where 72% of its population is below the age of 32. And to my mind, this is the biggest social and economic transformation that is happening across the world, that the population in India is getting younger and younger and will keep getting younger till 2040, whereas the population across Europe and America is getting older and older. So you have 8,500 Americans retiring a day, 8,000 Germans are retiring a day. But the population of India will keep getting younger, and rarely has a country which is passing through such light dependency burdens. And actually India is passing through the period of baby boomers, much like what happened to UK in 1960s. Rarely has a country not created wealth. Therefore, the challenge really is that India must create wealth during this period. So what does India need to do to grow at those rates of high 9 to 10% and reap the demographic advantage? I think several things need to be done. One is that over the last 68 to 69 years, India has made itself a very complex, very complicated and a difficult place to do business in. We've over the years built a lot of rules, regulation, procedures, paperwork. And I think India needs to dismantle a lot of that paperwork, a lot of those procedures, make it very easy and simple for people to create wealth, for businesses to create wealth. It will not be able to sustain growth over a long period of time till businesses are not able to create wealth. And therefore, India needs to dismantle a lot of its regulatory framework, which it has done. A lot of that work is underway. We've made things easier. Today it's possible to do exports in one day. It's possible to register in a company in a couple of hours. Medium and small enterprises can register in just a couple of minutes. The number of forms for import and export have been brought down from 12 and 9 to just 3. So a huge amount of work has been done, but a lot of work is underway. But India is a very large country. It's bigger than 24 countries of Europe, and therefore the challenge is really to make states easy and simple. And one of the things we've done is to make the states compete. We said that we'll rank states on ease of doing business. So the first year we ranked states on ease of doing business. And Gujarat came number 1, Andhra came number 2. But the good thing was that the mineral-rich states of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh came number 3 and 4. So they did a lot of work. But the second year when we did this ranking over 360 action points, Gujarat was dethroned. Andhra and Telangana came number 1. And again, some of the good states of eastern UP did very well. So the sense of competition, of ranking states, of naming and shaming states, and of putting it in public domain really worked well and enabled states to move forward. And I think this trend of naming and shaming states and ranking them, we are continuing in the field of learning outcomes on health and education, where India is actually, the southern part of India, the western part of India does well, but 7 states of India on the eastern part of India do very poorly, and therefore it's better that you do this and put things in public domain so people who vote must know how their leaders are performing. And if they are not performing, they must be held accountable. And therefore, even on education and health, on education outcomes, on health outcomes, we are doing this now, this year from NITI Aayog. I think the second key challenge is that India must realize that it's a very integral part of the global supply chain. We are in a globalized world. Despite protectionism, despite Trumpism, despite Brexit, we are in a globalized world. Things will get designed somewhere, get manufactured somewhere else. We'll get, all the integration will take in another place. And therefore, India needs to open up its economy in a very big way. And in the last couple of years, we've been opening up our economy in a very major way. We've opened up our foreign direct investments in defense, in railways, in e-commerce, just about everything, housing, everything we've opened up. And India today is actually one of the most open economies of the world. In the last 2.5 years, our foreign direct investment has grown by about 60% at a point of time when FDI across the world has fallen by 16%. So, foreign direct investment, we've beaten China. We are the #1 recipient of foreign direct investment. But India needs to open up more on the trade policy. There's no country in the world has actually grown without being a major exporting nation. When Japan grew at the peak of its growth, exports were a very major component of its GDP growth. So was the case with Korea, and so was the case with China. And therefore, trade liberalization, trade exports, standardization to exporting international standards in production, all these are very critical, and we need to pursue this in a bigger way. But India increasingly has to become an integral part of the global supply chain. The third key factor is that India is seeing a huge amount of energy, vibrancy, and dynamism in its startup movement. And if India is to grow with creation of jobs, it will be very difficult to do this till we do not see young entrepreneurship. And we are seeing a tremendous, India has about 19,400 startups. Their valuation is in the region of 75 billion. But by 2023-24, we'll see close to about 100,000 startups in India with a valuation of about 500 billion. So you will see a completely new movement. The IIT director in Mumbai told me that last year, 37% of the people who passed out either joined a startup or started their own startup. So we are seeing this big movement, and we are trying to accelerate this further by creating 500 new tinkering labs in schools so that students become very savvy as far as innovation is concerned. We create a completely new ecosystem in school. We are creating about 100 new incubation centers. We are assisting existing incubation centers to raise their standards. But we are seeing a completely unique movement. One of the girls actually who started an app called Culture Alley and went on to teach Japanese and Mandarin, then switched over to English, and as last year, through an app called Hello English, taught 9 million Indians how to speak English. No school has been able to do this, but 9 million Indians how to speak English. Similarly, when the tsunami happened in Tamil Nadu, the government of Tamil Nadu is finding it very difficult to reach out food packets and identify people who were stranded. It was one of our young startups called Social Cops who joined hands with the government of Tamil Nadu and assisted and supported them. We are seeing a tremendous amount of movement in health startups. If you look at Portia, if you look at Practo, if you look at a startup which has relocated from Silicon Valley into Bangalore called Mitra Biotech, or if you look at Consio Medicals, all of these are unique examples of India having done extremely well in the health startup, and these are all international. Consio Medical, for instance, has done tremendous work in stool management, which I didn't realize 100 million people across the world actually suffer from issues of stool management. It's not an issue much talked about. But they did an adapter which is not only used by All India Institute of Medical Sciences or by Fortis or by Escorts, but is actually exported across. And therefore, or Portia, which has been able to provide assistance support to almost about millions of people who suffer at home. But what we are seeing, the unique thing is that the number of young women startups, I mean, Shanti Mohan, who started Let's Venture, has been able to ensure that a number of investors come from abroad and are able to fund into our startups. Or look at Meena Ganesh, who's started Portia and has done some unique work. So we are seeing great movement. We are also seeing great movement in IITs, particularly in IIT Chennai, where we've seen the invention of a unique scooter called S340, which has gone into production in Bangalore, which is a smart scooter and could be the Tesla of the scooter world for the future. So we are seeing tremendous movement even in the field of education. I mean, we have a startup by a young boy called Baiju who does education and actually Facebook has invested in Baiju today so that Zuckerberg has personally invested into Baiju so that he feels that this is the most exciting startup in the education field. So a great amount of work in innovation. We are pushing this acceleration further through startups, through incubators, through supporting existing incubation. So tremendous amount of energy in startups happening. The fourth point I want to make is that India has actually in the last 4 to 5 years become the center for global innovation in many, many ways. And in the last 4 to 5 years, we've seen about 1,500 multinational corporations relocating to Bangalore and Hyderabad for their innovation, global innovations, which used to be a part of multinational corporations, is relocated to Bangalore and Hyderabad. So whether it's Microsoft Bing, whether it's GE's low-cost ECG machine, which they innovated for $2,200 here, rather than $25,000 in the United States of America, where it's today possible for them to do an ECG for just $1, or whether it's the Philips low-cost machine or John Deere's 60 HP tractor, which all innovated in India. And therefore, India has seen this huge combination of entrepreneurship, innovation, skills to drive frugal engineering from India. And that is why a company like Renault, which is a European company and it's in its 118 years history, has never innovated a car outside Europe, came to Chennai, innovated, designed, manufactured a car called the Renault Kwid, which it is today exporting to more than 40 countries of the world. And Hyundai actually exports almost 60% of its production to more than 123 countries from India. 60% of its production. They came looking at the domestic market, but are using the domestic market as a base for exports. So all this innovation is happening here. And it's happening for the rest of the world from here. And this is not much talked about, but this is the reality. The fifth point I want to make is that how India drives this process of urbanization will be very critical to how it transforms itself. In the next 4 to 5 decades, India will see more than 500 million people moving into the process of urbanization. Cities are critical. They account for just 3% of the earth landmass, but they account for almost 80% of the global GDP. The process of urbanization has ended across Europe and America and China, but it's starting its process of growth in India. And in the next 5 decades, we'll do more urbanization than what we've done in the last 500 years. And therefore, how sustainably we do it will be critical. When the West urbanized, land, gas, and water were cheaply available. And because they were cheaply available, America had the luxury to live in New Jersey, guzzle gas, travel to New York in limousines. They created cities like Atlanta where 99% of the people travel by cars. So they created some of the most polluting cities of the world. Now, India cannot follow that model, because if you follow that model, then the world would require 4 planet Earth. But alas, we have only 1 planet. And therefore, India needs to be a model as far as sustainable development is concerned. We need to make our cities very compact. We need to do dense development. We need to have public transportation. We need to recycle our waste. We need to recycle our water. And these are very critical challenges of the future. And how India has been a very, very reluctant urbanizer. All our schemes were for rural development. We have not invested adequately in urbanization. But the key to growth and long-term growth, and cities are also centers of creativity, innovation, growth, and therefore how we drive urbanization will be very critical for how India grows in the future and how India transforms itself in the future. The sixth point I want to make is that it's very critical that India uses technology to leapfrog across sector. There's vast transformation taking place. The sharing economy is upon us. The way we travel, the way we eat, the way we live, the way we experience travel and tourism will all be a part of the sharing economy. And therefore, it's very important that India uses technology to leapfrog. India is the only country in the world with 1 billion biometric, 1 billion plus biometric. We are the only country with 1 billion plus mobiles. And therefore, it's very important that India uses biometrics to transform itself. we are seeing this process of, we've had this process of radical demonetization, being one of the most radical steps taken. But in my view, India is a country, without getting into the positives or negatives, it's important to understand that India is a country which used to do 95% of its personal consumption expenditure in cash. India used to do 85% transactions in cash. Personal consumption 95%, otherwise 85% transactions are in cash. Now, India was a $2 trillion economy, but another parallel economy which is close to $1 trillion. Now, you can't, if your ambition and hunger is to become a $10 trillion economy, it's not possible to have $2 trillion economy which is growing at 7%, 8%, but you have another parallel economy which is also growing and expanding. You need to smash that. And you need to converge and integrate the informal economy with the formal economy. And I think one of the good things that's happened is that the informal economy, the black economy, has now converged and integrated itself with the formal economy. And therefore, any growth in formal economy will enable you to grow at a much faster, because your base becomes bigger. And over a period of time, if we are able to contain the emergence of a new black economy, then it's possible for us to have greater amount of resources available for government, to have taxes. It'll enable government to put in more resources. It'll ensure that your interest rates come down. It'll enable you to get more funding for infrastructure. It'll enable you to get a great amount of resources for education, health, nutrition, which are critical for India's growth, to be put in. But I think the most important thing is to push for digitization. It is today possible that you can use your Aadhaar, your biometric, to do all your transactions. And in the coming years, India will be one of those countries which will use biometrics to do all its transactions. What we call the Aadhaar Pay. Just use your biometric, it takes you to your bank, and the bank then takes you to your account, and you can do all your debit, credit. So actually, India will be one of those countries which will make debit card, credit cards, ATM, POS machines, all irrelevant and redundant in the next 3 to 4 years. They will all become redundant. Everybody will be transaction using his thumb. It will be the power of the biometric or your iris which will enable you to do all your transaction. No country in the world has that back end, and no country in the world has this possibility of radically jumping several levels of growth and leapfrogging. And therefore, this is a unique opportunity for India to transform itself. And this, to my mind, is very, very critical, that not merely in payments but across sectors, India has the possibility of bringing in efficiency. Because we do a lot of subsidy schemes to assist the poor people. A lot of that leakage takes place. And all your schemes, what we are trying to push in the government is that all our schemes must get integrated with Aadhaar, must get linked with biometrics, so that teachers' salaries must get into the account based on this. Your fertilizer subsidy must get linked to your Aadhaar. Your LPG subsidy, every single assistance which the government must be based on Aadhaar, so that the person who's the actual recipient must get the money based on a thumb impression, and it empowers the beneficiary to a great extent. And if this will ensure that all the leakages, the vast amount of leakages that takes place in the system, gets removed and gets elevated from here, and India becomes a far more efficient economy. So my view is that it's necessary for India to grow rapidly. It needs structural transformation. It needs radical transformation. It needs political and administrative will, which will enable it to radically transform itself. I think a status quoist approach will not work. It's important that we push for growth. And as we push for growth, it's important that India lays a lot of stress on sectors like education, health, nutrition, which will make it get the benefit of demographic transition. India has seen a lot of availability of access for education, but the quality of education must improve. India must improve its nutritional standards so that the extent of stunting must get removed. India must ensure that the maternal mortality rate and infant mortality rate radically improves. These are critical issues. But I think the innovative spirit, the startup movement, the process of urbanization, and our basic a belief that India must grow rapidly and India must remain optimist. It must be a nation full of optimism. It must be a nation with positivity. And I think if we keep embarking on this right track, my personal belief is that it's possible for India to grow rapidly. While I've talked about the positives, there are various other things India needs to do. There are several challenges which India must meet. And the challenges are, number one, to my mind, it's, first and foremost, there has to be consistency, predictability of policies. And therefore, one of the key things is that we must have policies which enable us to have consistency and predictability of policy over a long period of time. Secondly, it's important to have total factor productivity in the economy. At the peak of its growth, when Japan was growing, total factor productivity accounted for almost 32% in its GDP. So total factor productivity was important. When Korea overtook Japan, total factor productivity accounted for almost 41-42% in the GDP. Their contribution of productivity was to that extent. But when China overtook them and was growing at the peak at 11%, total factor productivity was accounting for almost 70% of the GDP contribution. And therefore, total factor productivity is critical, and that would require us to reform in several areas of land and labor, etc., to enable India to become a far more productive nation. And the third key thing is, to my mind, which is very important, that the services sector are important. They give you growth, but in the long run, India must have growth with job creation. And job creation necessarily has to come from manufacturing. And therefore, a huge thrust to manufacturing for creation of jobs is critical. But within manufacturing, there are new areas of emergence which require structural reforms. For instance, to my mind, you need 7 million more doctors in India. You need about 20 million more nurses. You need health technicians. But the health education sector, which is controlled by Medical Council of India, is thoroughly corrupt, and therefore you need to dismantle Medical Council of India and allow reforms to take place. Similarly, in the education sector, you need very radical reforms in UGC, in AICT, in the higher technical education, and in the higher education center. There's no reason why such a vast number of students of India go abroad to study. If you need to create great centers of excellence, great universities within India where Indians can get great education and enable outstanding universities from abroad to come and collaborate here. And therefore, reforms in health and education, structural reforms are critical. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is my broad view on transforming India. And my view is that we must have the passion, we must have the hunger, we must have the ambition to grow at high rates, and we must continue to radically make structural transformation in India's economy. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.